because they keep telling us the Israelis have said yes, the only problem is Hamas. And it's transparently, patently obvious that that's not the case. So this is not constructive ambiguity. This is deceit. This is dishonesty. And as such, it is not going to move us forward.
What is making it so hard to reach a ceasefire agreement between Israel and Hamas? And what are the factors or people getting in the way and why? Throughout the war, both Hamas and Israel have offered up ceasefire proposals via their intermediaries. Despite pressure mounting on the two sides, none of the proposals so far seem to satisfy both warring parties. So we asked some experts, Dr. Azzam Tamimi, a Palestinian academic and political activist, and Daniel Levy, a former Israeli peace negotiator, on why they think ceasefire negotiations have failed thus far.
Well, clearly ceasefire negotiations between Israel and Hamas, and of course they are conducted indirectly via the so-called mediators, the Qataris and the Egyptians, keep failing because Netanyahu and his governing coalition don't want to end the war except on their own terms. And their terms are impossible from the point of view of the Palestinians. They want the Palestinians to surrender. They want the Palestinians to succumb to Israeli occupation and give up on their right to resist this foreign occupation of their land.
In talks like these, there are a lot of complex details, but there's also a simple core question here. And the talks have consistently failed because they have not successfully addressed the Gordian knot where we are stuck. And that is between the position on one side, a Hamas position, but it wouldn't only be a Hamas position, that this actually has to be an end to the assault on Gaza. This isn't a temporary pause, a hiatus followed by more death, destruction, humanitarian crisis, but a ceasefire, an end. Versus the Israeli government position, which is that we can have a brief pause, but then the war must continue. And when you have that kind of a clash, the question is, what will the mediator do? Where will leverage be placed? Hamas knows it cannot get an ironclad guarantee, but it needs assurances that there is maximum plausibility to this ceasefire holding. Israel has given assurances that the ceasefire won't hold. It has given commitments to continuing the war.
Now, Netanyahu in particular, to some extent also some of his generals, stand to lose a lot if this war ends without achieving what they claim to be their objectives. That is the destruction, complete destruction of Hamas and the retrieval of the hostages, apparently in exchange for nothing. This is not going to happen. The Palestinians, and not just Hamas, the whole Palestinians, the entire Palestinian population, believe that Israel is a foreign occupying power. They have every legitimate right to resist this power and to free themselves and free their country.
The latest ceasefire proposal was called Ambiguous as it was allegedly an Israeli deal that was announced by Biden. Biden's administration were adamant that Hamas was the only thing getting in the way of the deal going ahead. On Monday, Hamas and other Palestinian groups announced that they had accepted the deal. And Israeli officials are yet to officially confirm their agreement to what is supposed to be their own deal.
Quite simply, the US is not acting as a mediator. It is consistently aligning and arming one of the parties. And in that role, it is not facilitating a way out of this. And this is what appeared to be changing with the Biden speech of May 31, that maybe the US was getting serious about a permanent cessation, a sustainable calm. But then they walked that back, and the US has allowed not constructive ambiguity, but allowed clarity that they are not going to be committed to preventing this from continuing. They will not give maximum plausibility to the idea of a ceasefire. They are going to pretend that what Israel is telling us every single day is not happening. We have a very curious situation where America puts forward what it says is an Israeli proposal. America tells us that the Israelis have accepted the proposal. So what's going on here? This was probably an attempt at constructive ambiguity and the promise, the hope that the Biden plan and speech of May 31, the dynamic that maybe could have got us out of this impasse, because putting a plan on the table is a big deal, that seemed to be premised on the idea that finally the US administration, Biden himself, was leaning into the idea that this is a permanent ceasefire. But what happened? As soon as the Israeli side said, we'll take the bits we like, Biden rode it back, and they have not stuck to that. And so what you have is an almost Orwellian reality in which the US is saying Israel accepts the plan, it's an Israeli plan. And the Israelis are telling us morning, noon and night, categorically, unequivocally, the Prime Minister, other Likud lawmakers, and of course the extreme right parties of Ben-Gvir and Smotrich. They are telling us we will continue the war, full stop. There is no link to a permanent ceasefire. And here you have Secretary Blinken and other administration officials. I don't know if they assume that we all live in some kind of alternative universe where the only voices we can hear, that we have access to, are American officials, because they keep telling us the Israelis have said yes, the only problem is Hamas. And it's transparently, patently obvious that that's not the case. So this is not constructive ambiguity. This is deceit. This is dishonesty. And as such, it is not going to move us forward.
We asked if they think either side really wants peace and what that may look like.
Now, when people talk about peace, I think everybody wants peace. But what sort of peace? The Israelis want a peace in which the Palestinians are completely vanquished, completely subjugated, whereas the Palestinians want peace based on justice. They want their homes back, they want their lives back, they want their dignity and freedom back. Now, Netanyahu is the guy who stands to lose more than anybody else if the Zionist declared objectives are not achieved, because he has a problem with his own society, he has a problem with his own regime. There are court cases waiting for him. He and his generals most likely will be questioned about the failure that happened on the 7th of October and the failure that has kept being seen over the past 8 months and until this war is over.
Peace is quite simply not on the agenda. Now, there are no winners in war. War is horrific. That is why war should be prevented. That's why we should do everything when a war starts to stop that war. There is that Clausewitzian statement that war is the continuation of politics by other means. So neither side, I don't think, are trying to achieve peace, but they are trying to achieve certain things. For Hamas, this relies on what is not unusual in asymmetric warfare, where you have a very powerful party and a party with much less power. Israel is a nuclear-armed state. It is provided with military assistance by the most powerful country in the world. It has its own domestic military production capacity. It's seen as a regional superpower. So against that, Hamas, which is probably the smallest of the axis of resistance fighting forces, what it can do is use Israel's excess of power against Israel itself. But for that to work, Israel has to fall into that trap, and I would argue Israel has fallen into that trap at horrendous cost to the Palestinians in Gaza. But by using its force in this indiscriminate way, from day one saying it would cut, as it is able to, all food, fuel, water and electricity from the civilian population in Gaza, this is a huge self-inflicted defeat for Israel. Reputational, moral, legal, economic. This doesn't happen overnight, but this is going to shift the power balance. And we see on the battlefield that the destruction is in fact a failure, because it means Israel hasn't achieved a realizable war aim. It instead has pursued wholesale destruction and Hamas has remained resilient. So the balance of forces on the battlefield has also not worked to Israel's advantage. So what is Israel trying to achieve here? Israel is pursuing a maximalist goal where inside the Israeli cabinet, the division is not between those who want peace and those who want more war. Forget about that. The division is between one group who are openly eradicationist in favor of ethnic cleansing, again after the first Nakba, displacing the Palestinians from Gaza, and one imagines from the West Bank next, and resettling Gaza, versus another camp inside the government who aren't necessarily against those things, but have said the goal right now is the permanent reoccupation and what they call de-radicalization in Gaza. If you've seen the images coming, you would think that applies to the Israeli side. They're going to de-radicalize their own society, but no, that's not what they're talking about.
Israeli officials have repeatedly said that nothing will stop them, and it was recently written that Hamas is far from beaten and are as committed as ever to the fight that they picked on October the 7th. Many believe that both sides are fighting for their existence.
I think this war is increasingly becoming an existential war. Both sides realize that they have completely opposite projects. The Palestinians want their freedom and they want their homes, they want their sovereignty, their independence, they want their dignity. And the Zionists want to consolidate this colonial outpost that was created by Western Europe and is today provided with protection, both military, political, as well as diplomatic, by the United States of America and its allies.
Henry Kissinger once said that in this kind of asymmetrical warfare, and he was an expert at this, having pursued enough war crimes himself, that the guerrilla resistance force wins if it does not lose. And we are seeing that here. Hamas is going to come out of this stronger. That is already the case. Israel is going to come out of this weaker. There is a shift in the balance of power regionally and globally. And this is of Israel's own making when you conduct the kinds of actions that it has done, which is not to justify October the 7th, what happened before in terms of the permanent occupation, or what has happened since. Israel seems to have set a goal which is not only unachievable, but scarily is something they may continue to pursue in terms of the permanent displacement and deepening the aggression against Palestinians. And that has to be prevented.
Now, historically, since Hamas came into existence, there have been numerous ceasefire attempts. Most of these were negotiated indirectly. And as I document in my book, Hamas Unwritten Chapters, in every single case of those truces that were negotiated between the two sides, it was Israel who violated the truce, not Hamas. Not a single time. That's the nature of colonialism. The colonialists, until they are completely defeated and the land is liberated from them, will continue to aspire to consolidate their colonialism.
Is a negotiated outcome possible? Israel is not going to destroy Hamas. Israel itself is not going to collapse. So is a negotiated outcome possible, at least to bring an end to this devastation? And here, the question has to be about the cost-benefit calculation. Hamas has made clear that it is willing to accept a ceasefire under conditions that I think would not only be put forward by Hamas and the other groups that have signed up to this. Conditions of a ceasefire on both sides, the hostages would be released, Palestinians held in Israeli jails, often in detention without trial, often political prisoners, some would be released. You would have the withdrawal of the Israeli military. You would have, finally, the ramping up of humanitarian assistance. Israel has rejected this position and has said the war will continue until it reaches aims that I think it has intentionally defined as a bar that one can never reach. That's not how these things happen. So the cost-benefit equation is primarily what's the cost-benefit equation for Israel, the party that is refusing under any circumstances, other than the capitulation of the other side, which doesn't happen, to end this war.
I wrote about the concept of Hudna, or long-term truce, in my book in detail, and how I imagined it could work. And I think it could have worked at a certain moment in this conflict. Yet the Israelis never really recognized the potential. They never accepted the notion. Because the truce, long-term truce or Hudna, from the point of view of most Palestinians, as represented by Hamas, is the only way you can have a disengagement, you can have a real ceasefire. The notion here is that this is a de facto recognition of the status quo, but it's not a de jure recognition of that status quo. The status quo is not acceptable for the Palestinians. I will take, in my case, for instance, I'll never ever recognize the legitimacy of the occupation of my mother's house in Beersheba. The same applies to millions of the descendants of the Palestinians who were dispossessed in 1948. But I would accept, and I believe most Palestinians would accept, the idea that this conflict is not delivering what either side is expecting, and therefore it's not a bad idea to disengage, to stop fighting for a while, for 10 years, 15 years, or 30 years, as Sheikh Ahmad Yassin once proposed to the Israelis. And during that period, people can have a respite, then there will be a new generation emerging, and let future generations decide what they want to do about this conflict. And a long-term truce does not mean surrender, does not mean subjugation. It means an end of occupation. Yet, in the current climate, and with Zionism becoming increasingly fanatic, and in religious terms, justifying it more and more in religious terms, it is now in government in Israel, it is highly unlikely that this formula will work. It could have worked when there were people like Rabin, maybe, and that's why Rabin was assassinated. But it can never work with the likes of Ben Gvir or Smotrich or Netanyahu and whoever is working with him. But the idea of a long-term truce, in theory, is a brilliant idea. And I believe if Hamas or the Palestinians were to enter into such an understanding, they are obliged by the religion of Islam to keep the word and to fulfill the terms of the agreement.